Alright, so what song you just heard was Hail to the Chief. And every single time our president enters the room when it's formal, that is supposed to be playing. So every State of the Union address, you're going to hear Hail to the Chief. So what we're going to look at today is the role of the president and how do you get the presidency. And now that you got it, what do you got to do? So we're going to look at Article 2, the executive branch, and kind of, like when you think about it, some days it's good to be president. They do have an aging process. It's pretty quick once you get the job, but we're going to look at how you get the job and what do you do. So this is the White House. This is what, you're going to live in and is going to be your home, your safety for 4 years or 8 years, depending on if you get reelected. So let's look at the requirements. First off, you got to be at least 35 years old in order to be elected president. And remember, they're making this in 1789. 35 years old is actually pretty old back then. 35 now, not that old, but by 35 you should have some experience in the world. You have lived, you've probably gone to college if you're going to do that, you're married, you have kids, maybe you're none of those things, but you've had some experience in the real world. You also have to be a resident of the United States for at least 14 years. And so what that means is you have to have an address here in the country. So like military people who have to deploy, that means go overseas, they have to go to another country, are people like military people who live in South Korea because they're stationed there. It doesn't mean that they don't have a residency here in the United States. Same thing with like business people. Sometimes business people live overseas, but yet they still have the United States as their resident. You also have to be what we call a natural born U.S. citizen. That means kind of two things. Okay? One, you were born on American soil. That can be any of our 50 states or our territories. So as long as you were born on U.S. soil, you're good. The other way is that you are born to an American citizen. So at the time of your birth, you inherit citizenship through your parent, our parents. So if one of your parents is a U.S. citizen and you are born overseas, don't worry about it. You can be president because technically at the time of your birth, you are a U.S. citizen. You can inherit your citizenship through one parent or both parents. It doesn't matter if it's your mom or your dad. There's plenty of people who are U.S. citizens who have become this way because of one parent. Okay? So those are the requirements to be president. Things that we don't really ask for. We don't care if people have military service. There have been a lot of presidents who have served. About 26 of them have served in the United States military at some point or another. We don't really look at education either. It's not really a requirement. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to have formal education. Most of our presidents have, so you got about 10 who really don't have what we would call formal education or college degrees. Some of them attended college, but they didn't graduate. And it could be, because of things that were going on. Like Truman does not have a college degree, or he didn't have a college degree. But, World War I is going on, and so he, enlists. So there's reasons why sometimes people don't finish their college degrees or they don't have the education part. The previous government jobs is not a requirement either. We've had plenty of presidents who have never been elected to a public office. Some of those are former generals, like Eisenhower. He was a general, and then he becomes our president in 1952. So he never got elected to a government job. He just got elected to the presidency. Okay. Same thing with President Trump. He was a CEO of a business. He had never been elected to a previous government job, and then he gets elected to be the president. So having prior experience is not necessarily a requirement. Now that's not saying that these aren't things voters are looking for. It is going to be a question asked, about military service, your education background, have you, what kind of jobs have you worked in the government? So that's not to say that those things would not be asked of you. And it would not be something that, might come up later as maybe a negative or something that your opponent would use against you when you're campaigning. Next thing that we're going to look at is how you actually get to the White House. First off, you got to start campaigning, and you got to campaign pretty early. You can't start campaigning, the year of an election. You're actually starting to get stuff ahead of time. Most of our candidates are starting to, they would run polls. So polls, remember, are political surveys, and they're trying to figure out, would they have enough support to get to the White House, to make it to that road. So they do a lot of ads, they do speeches, they do debates. We're going to look more at campaigning later, but it is a big part of the road to the White House. You got to raise a lot of money. Campaigns are expensive. So when you are looking on the internet, when you're looking on any of these social media sites, they are paying those places to put their ads out there, and that costs a lot of money. Same thing with like voter support. You've got to get voter support out there, and that costs money, and that costs that campaign funds. Okay, so you got to be, campaigning is crucial. You've seen it a lot in this past couple of months here in North Carolina. You're going to see it more once the primaries are over. Okay. So campaign. Then why you're campaigning, the primaries are going on. So primary elections are where voters of a political party are going to determine who they want to be their candidate from the list. So you've got lots of people who are typically running in a primary, and so the political party members can choose who they would like to actually be their main candidate in the general election. So this is the most current one from the Democrat primary. You've got Biden and Sanders. They're year 2 now. Elizabeth Warren was in there, but she's not anymore. She's dropped out. But you're looking at, you almost need about 2,000 delegate votes to win the nomination. Okay, so here's where it's setting right now. Now that's going to change. We have more primaries out there. Primaries are done in states. So remember, the states run elections. Every state has theirs. Sometimes a lot of states do them on one day, like we saw in March with Super Tuesday. A lot of states, particularly in the South, were having their primaries. And so you're going to see more states doing it. And soon we will find out who the candidate's going to be. The next one is like the Republican primary, because they too have other people out there. But at this point, this guy's dropped out. Trump has won. He's got enough of the delegates there to win the nomination. So in a primary, your job, what you're trying to do is get the nomination, and you have to have so many of these delegate votes to get it. So it's typically done in the winter, spring of the election year. So you'll start seeing primaries in January, February, and then you're going to keep seeing them in the following couple of months until the states have done it, and now the political party knows who their people want to represent them in November of that year. You win the nomination of your political party. So if it's Joe Biden versus President Trump, that's who you're going to see. You're going to see a Democrat versus this Republican, President Trump. It could be Bernie Sanders. I mean, right now it's still kind of open and out there. So the road to the White House, once you've won the primary, okay, you go into the general election, and that's going to be in November. It's either the first Tuesday of the month or like the first Tuesday following a Monday. Anyway, it's at the beginning of the month in November. That's all you need to know. So when people go and they go vote, they have a choice of whatever they want. It doesn't matter if you're a registered party member. You could be a Democrat, you could be a Republican, but you can vote however you want to vote. Okay? So in primaries, that's a little bit different, but in the general election, it doesn't matter if you're a registered party member, which means you've declared a political party, or you're not. So you could be an independent, you could be unaffiliated, doesn't matter. You can go out and vote. So that day, the public, the population, the general population who's registered to vote can go vote. And then that night, you guys are going to see all those things coming in. And that night, you might not know who's going to be the president right away, but normally in the early morning hours, you're going to see who has won the popular vote. And based off that, you're projecting who's going to win the electoral college vote. And that is what really determines who the president's going to be. So this picture over here, this graph, is from the 2012 United States general election. So this was the incumbent, that means the current president, he was running for re-election, versus his opponent. Okay, so you had President Barack Obama, who's the Democrat, versus his challenger, the Republican Mitt Romney. So if you look at the actual popular vote, you might as well say 59, well, you could say really 60 million votes there. And then for Mitt Romney, you might as well say 57 million. Those were how many people cast their votes for those candidates. That's the popular vote. The electoral college vote is going to happen later in December. But really that November, by November 7th, we pretty much knew that President Obama had won re-election and that he would be the president for the next 4 years. And we knew it because of the Electoral College. So the Electoral College votes, you have to have at least 270 of them to win the presidency. And he had 303, and Mitt Romney had 206. So once President Obama crossed the 270 threshold, we pretty much knew he was going to be the president for the next 4 years. So the challenger would have called, like Mitt Romney called that night and congratulated the president, and he went ahead and he conceded. That means he admits he did not win the presidency to President Obama, who won. So the delegates, the people who actually vote, they are going to vote based off what you and I, the general population, the general election, has told them to vote. You have to win the Electoral College in order to win the presidency. So it's a two-step process. All of our other elections are very different. So in like a Senate or a House position, you are really running for just the general election. Whoever gets the most votes in the general election would be the senator or the House or governor or whatever the position is. So if you never see this, you never see Electoral College, then the people who are running would be House members or Senate members. So here's just some famous kind of elections that have happened over the years. So in the election of 1960, you can look at the popular vote. There's not much difference between Kennedy, the Democrat, and Nixon, the Republican. Not on popular vote. But then when you look at Electoral College vote, Kennedy won. He hit the magic mark, and so naturally he won the presidency, even though he only had about 100,000 more votes than his main opponent, Nixon.